So welcome to our machine learning project. We're going to talk about the urban air pollution challenge, where we want to predict the PM2.5 particulate matter concentration in the air every day for each city. Okay, let's dive into our machine learning procedure. So we are asked to use the RMSE and NMSE as metrics to predict the quality of the prediction of our models. For the data preprocessing part, we basically cleaned the data set. We removed some NAs. We, for example, also treated the categorical variables and so on. For the model generation part, we trained different models with different function, LM function, forest, and these steps also involve some hyperparameters tuning and some filter selection. Then for the model validation part, we use the tenfold cross validation to estimate the generation of the error of the models. And for the model selection, we mainly use the winner-takes-all approach and also some of combination of estimators. And finally, we'll assess the quality of our models. We'll test our train models on the testing set using the Zindi platform. Okay, so now let's dive into our data overview and pre-processing. So we basically started by importing the data, then we explored it. Then we managed the factors variables and also create a data set with only numerical variables. So we removed the category variables, but also target max, target mean, and so on, because we want to predict the mean of the target. Then we replaced the NAs by their mean. We also explored the distribution of the different variables for the target with its mean, its variance, but also the different histograms corresponding to the distribution of the independent variables that you can see here. And finally, we treated the category variables with the FastDummy package, which allows to convert the category variables into dummy variables, and the steps explained here. Okay, so let's dive into the model generation now.
A project with linear models, and we also use them to perform the feature selection. So we tried a bunch of different feature selection methods, so feature selection based on a PCA, on a ranking algorithm, on a forward selection, or on an MRMR selection. So some of those techniques could have been used independently of the linear model, like ranking, for example. It's a filtering method, but we wanted to avoid having to make completely arbitrary decisions. And so in order to avoid doing this, what we actually wanted to do is to see whether a training data set containing this or that variable would lead to an actual better performing learner. And to do this, we need to assess the quality of a learner. And so we need a metric like a cross-validation error-based metrics like the RMSE. And in order to compute them, we needed to choose a specific learner. And so the choice of the learner for this feature selection was the linear model, mainly because it's actually very fast. And so it's actually feasible to train it a very large number of times. So the results of this feature selection process were that actually the linear models that have the best performance are the ones that are trained on a dataset which contains all the variables, all the numerical variables, or almost all of them. And so we proceeded and trained other learners, more sophisticated learners, on a dataset containing all the numerical variables.
I will now talk about random forest, another algorithm that we used. Basically, the idea of random forest is to create a collection of multiple decision trees, make a prediction based on each tree, and then average those predictions. We present the algorithm in quite a lot of detail in the notebook. I won't go over those details here, but one thing that is important to note is that random forest has embedded methods for measuring variable importance. There are two methods. There is the mean decrease impurity metric and the mean decrease accuracy metric. And we explain them in the notebook, and then we display the ranking of the variable's importance according to each of those metrics. And also it's important to note that we used MDI to rank variable importance for question 5. Besides random forest, we also used other algorithms, namely a radial basis function neural network, nearest neighbor algorithm and general linear model using ridge regression and lasso regression. But we did not explain these algorithms in details because they did not give a good performance compared to other algorithms like random forest or support vector machine or GBM.
Okay, so another learner that we will focus on is the super vector machine. Super vector is mainly used for classification problem, but can also be applied to regression, and we call it super vector regression, where mainly the margin is replaced by an epsilon insensitive tube, and the idea is to fit the best hyperplane for the dataset, a bit like a regression line. We can see here all the theoretical aspects of this supervector regression problem until we find a loss function that allows to compute the error of our models, which is what we search. And then we will do some tuning of the hyperparameters, mainly the parameter C here, and also the epsilon, which is the width of this epsilon tube. And we will then assess the quality of the prediction using ZINDI.
Which we used quite extensively are both tree-based gradient boosting machines, and they're implemented in R by the packages GBM and XGBoost. So we had a little bit of a problem using GBM because it's actually extremely slow to run, and so we were just not able to run it in a reasonable time when using manual tenfold cross-validation like proposed in the practicals, and we instead had to rely on the internal cross-validation assessments by the package's functions, which we actually found were quite over-optimistic and not always extremely reliable. So we actually also had to heavily rely on the RMSE computed on the ZINDI test set submissions to actually have an idea of how well our GBM learners were performing. But apart from that, we found that both GBM and XGBoost learners had quite good performances. The hyperparameter, which really had an impact on the learner performance, was the number of trees added in the model. But if this number of trees is high enough, then we found that the learner performance is very robust with respect to changes in the hyperparameters, like in the loss function or things like that. And to give an idea, we always had RMSE between 34 and 36 on our ZINDI test set submissions. So GBM and XGBoost were actually among the best learners which we used for this project.
For question 5, we use the estimation of the conditional entropy through generalization error as explained in the assignment and in the book. And so the model that we used was the R-best model, which was random forest. And the method for ranking variable importance and select the 10 most important was the embedded method provided by random forest, which is MDI, which we explained before. And then we printed out what was asked, and we saw that for most variables, there was a significant improvement in predictive power by including each variable, except for the last ones, which had a 0 or slightly negative predictive power. And the way we explained this was to say that, well, since we measure the performance compared with a full model with only 10 variables, it's not really surprising that the 10 last variables have a generalization error which is close to the full model with 10 variables. And the other explanation could be that MDI is one possible measure of variable importance which is not perfect, and could also play a role in explaining these results.